2024 didn't just have a few great JRPGs. It was a tidal wave that marked the full return of a genre many once were concerned would be dead, and fewer saw this coming. Once the gold standard of storytelling in video games, at one point JRPGs were quietly fading into obscurity. That is, until a few different cultural and other factors sparked a renaissance for the genre. So let's jump back into the mid to late 2000s where the story starts. Japanese developers were by and large lost souls. Major franchises like Final Fantasy were dividing their fans, particularly with Final Fantasy XIII, which was extremely polarizing. It looked great, it still does, but felt totally sterile and out of touch with what series fans were wanting. Final Fantasy fans wanted towns, not hallways with kiosks. It's got a great musical score though. But not all was totally lost. On the Xbox 360, games like Lost Odyssey, Blue Dragon, and Tales of Vesperia were somewhat quietly keeping the torch burning, even if they weren't mainstream breakouts. The recent hit from Francis Sandfall Entertainment, Clair Obscur Expedition 33, is emblematic of that, as it is deeply inspired by Lost Odyssey. These efforts kept the flame alive for longtime fans, even as the genre's mainstream relevance seemed to be slipping. This was the era where Western games dominated the conversation. Mass Effect, Skyrim, Call of Duty. The JRPG felt like a relic by comparison. And then something snapped. Enter Keiji Inafune, Mr. Mega Man. In what felt like a Kanye West at the Grammys moment, he didn't hold back. "We're getting smoked by the West," he said in so many words. It was a brutally honest self-assessment of where the Japanese games business stood in the early 2010s. And while Inafune himself never really had a second act, his words did something no game at the time could. They lit a fire under Japan's developers' asses. He spoke truth to power and told them if they didn't right the ship, it would mean a continued dwindling in irrelevance for Japanese games. He was kinda right, but I don't know that even he saw the light at the end of the tunnel was so bright. And change didn't come overnight, but this was a turning point. This next gentleman saw the writing on the wall too, but from a different angle and maybe even sooner. With it, we saw the emergence of a new auteur, Hidetaka Miyazaki. While traditional JRPGs were struggling to redefine themselves, Miyazaki-san brought JRPG sensibilities with methodical pacing, world building, and player agency into something entirely new, but inspired from the past. From Software's Demon's Souls in 2009 and later Dark Souls in 2011 created a subgenre, the Souls-like. Reborn from the ashes of Kingsfield, Demon's Souls didn't follow trends. It didn't chase casual audiences. It trusted the players to be curious, fail, and then learn. Entering the ecosystem during a period when so many games were becoming streamlined and sanitized, Miyazaki's work introduced difficulty, mystery, and reverence for the player's journey. Some things that made early JRPGs so compelling. In many ways, Dark Souls showed that there was still a hunger for depth and challenge in gaming, and it inspired a generation of developers both inside and outside of Japan to return to heart and soul. But perhaps no effort captured this moment of loss and reinvention more than Final Fantasy XIV. Its original 1.0 release in 2010 was an epic fail, poorly optimized, confusingly designed, and critically panned. They thought they could rest on the laurels of Final Fantasy XI. But instead of abandoning ship, Square Enix did the unthinkable, rebuilt it from the ground up, and relaunched in 2013 as A Realm Reborn. If you're not familiar with this, I strongly recommend watching the No Clip documentary. I'll link it in the description of this video. This rebirth was ushered in by another Japanese games veteran who had been a player first. Just like Miyazaki-san, Naoki Yoshida, or Yoshi P, wasn't just a guy who wanted to keep iterating on the past. He wanted to chart a new course. As such, Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn, wasn't just a second chance. It was a beacon, a declaration that Japanese developers could still evolve, surprise, and lead the broader industry. It marked a philosophical pivot back to the values that once defined the genre. World building, community, polish, and once again, heart and soul. In many ways, it was quite a big, little domino that tipped the industry into breaking the dam. But more so, it signaled that we aren't giving up. We're going to get this right to our core fans. And meanwhile, anime was exploding. Fans who grew up on Toonami or watched shows like One Piece or Attack on Titan were now open to Japanese media like never before. Streaming made it accessible, and a cultural appetite was forming. JRPGs were no longer just the relics remembered by Gen Xers with Sega CDs. Love you guys. But they were becoming a natural extension of a new generation's love for this art form. And JRPGs were about to meet that demand head on. And that brings us full swing into the mid-2010s. The PS4 and Nintendo Switch became unlikely JRPG machines. Not by accident, but because the audience was finally hungry again. Octopath Traveler would reinvent the old-school JRPG with stupendous HD 2D visuals. Final Fantasy XV was bold and new, despite again receiving a mixed reception. Nier Automata came out of nowhere, swinging with ideas no one else was daring to try. There were also tons of ports of old games from JRPG's legendary past. And then came the crown jewel, 2016's Persona 5. Stylish, confident, turn-based, and modern. This was perhaps the JRPG of the era, oozing with style and narrative substance. Did I mention turn-based? Many thought this was an archaic style of gameplay, but they were dead wrong. And right behind it? Dragon Quest XI. Traditional, refined, and almost defiantly old school. The message was clear. There was no one way to do this. The genre had range once more, and people were hungry for the old school style of game, but in a new package. Ports, remasters, and new IPs kept the fire burning. Slowly but surely, the JRPG was no longer just back. It was evolving into something new, reinventing itself while honoring what made it special. Then came 2024. This wasn't just a comeback. It was an explosion, or as I like to coin it, the year of the JRPG. Grand Blue Fantasy Relink came out of nowhere and surprised a lot of people with its superb visuals and gameplay. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was a massive game that built upon everything Square Enix got right with Remake. It captured nostalgia for the original game, but brought it to new heights with immense gameplay depth. Sega overall was the publisher of the year without question. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth proved that the appetite for the series was not slowing down, and neither was the quality bar. And Atlas stepped up to the plate and hit a grand slam. First, there was Persona 3 Reload, an Unreal Engine 5 remake that made people rethink their favorite Persona game. Then, Metaphor ReFantazio, with its fresh approach, was a Game of the Year contender. SMT5 Vengeance was no slouch either. It refined some of the narrative problems from the original Switch release, and might have the tightest gameplay systems of the bunch. Vanillaware's Unicorn Overlord showed how deep tactical RPGs could shine in the modern era, and many more titles. This deluge was no coincidence. This was a movement where the genre found its footing again and the iron was hot. So why does all this matter? Well, while other genres chased trends, battle passes, live service gimmicks, JRPGs got back to the roots. Tight gameplay loop, in-depth storytelling, strong creative vision. Yes, there's some total slop out there when you look for it, but the number of quality experiences is higher than ever. We're in a new golden age. Studios like Atlas, Falcom, and Monolith Soft didn't just follow hype. They refined what they knew best and doubled down on what made their games timeless. Others like Square Enix found themselves again after a long, dark period. In my mind, the JRPG didn't just make a comeback. It matured and adapted without losing its identity. Whether you've been here since Final Fantasy I on the NES, or just discovered this medium, this renaissance is something worth celebrating. But more importantly, it's valuable to understand how we got here and crawl out of those dark times. That way we understand what makes the genre great broadly. And so here's to more years of success for the JRPG. If you like this video, stick around for more. Peace!